Hello, everyone. My name is Zsakee. I'm here with the UAU Census Outreach Team. And today on this historic Juneteenth, we're going to be presenting on African American history and the census. And afterward, we'll have a panel discussion with some community leaders about the relevance of the topic, during these current times. And so joining us later on our panel will be Mr. Abu Sai of Akasi. We'll have Miss Debbie Ann Paige joining us as well. We'll have Tanisha Franks of UFT. She'll be joining us as well. And Mr. John Macbeth of St. Philip's and Occupy the Block. So let's jump into our presentation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oops, I need to get this out of the way. Okay, once again, welcome to our presentation. This is on African American history and the census. We'll start at the beginning with the very first census in 1790 and come up to current 2020. And so we'll start with a bit of trivia. So hopefully everyone has a cell phone available and can participate because you'll need to join the quiz. So if you can take out your cell phone and text ZL499 to the number 22333 just once to join, you'll get a confirmation text letting you know that you've joined. And then you can answer this question. What year was the last to have Negro as an option for race on the census? So again, you'll text the number 22333. You'll text the code ZL499. That'll allow you to join the quiz or the poll rather, and then you can send your answer. So we already have some activity there with 2010. I'll give it another minute to see if we get another response in. Any more guesses? Well, we'll have a couple more opportunities to participate in the poll. So you can still go ahead and join if you'd like, but I'm going to move on and see what the answer is. And it turns out it is in fact 2010. So the 2010 census was the last to have Negro on it, on the questionnaire as an option for race. That seems quite recent. It honestly was. Just 10 years ago, we were using a term that had long been deemed politically incorrect and racist on a federal form. The purpose of which was to self-identify. So, there's reasons behind that, and we'll kind of explore how we got to this point. And so here's just a brief timeline of the census from start to now. So we had our first census in 1790. We had a civil rights, victory here in 1870 when African Americans were entitled to a complete count. In 1900, Negro replaced colored on the census form. And here we are in 2020, and we no longer see that on the form. So a lot has changed with regard to who gets counted and how they are counted. Furthermore, the language around ethnicity and race has changed as well. So let's dig in. To start, prior to the first census count in 1790, The Constitutional Convention took place in 1783, and a compromise had to be reached, and that is called the Three-Fifths Compromise. Essentially, what that was that the southern states were allowed to count 3/5 of the slave population toward the state's population count. And the delegates had to agree upon that. So why was that even up for discussion? Why was it so important that a compromise had to be reached? The population count is used to determine the number of representatives that each state gets in the House of Representatives. That's called apportionment. And for example, the first data that will be released after the 2020 census count is complete is the number of representatives that each state will receive based upon that count. So in 1783, southern states wanted to boost their population count and therefore increase their numbers in the House of Representatives by counting 3/5 of their slave population toward the population count. It didn't give them the benefit of having counted all of the slaves. That therein lies the compromise. The North, didn't want that to be the case. So it's interesting because the southern states considered slaves to be property. And so when it came to the census count, the population count, representation, and taxation, southern states have found themselves making an argument for including slaves in the population count. And so in 1790, when the first census rolls out, the first census count, not only is it the first census count, but it begins the long and to current history of the undercount in the African American community. This is another way of saying that is that the Census Bureau considers the African American community to be a hard to count population or historically undercounted. So what does that mean? Because this is a multi-generational undercount that persists today. So it began in the 1700s, but it's still an issue now in 2020. So what does it mean to be hard to count? Hard to count populations are those for whom barriers exist to full and representative inclusion in the data collection process. There are 4 main categories under that hard to count umbrella. They are hard to locate. So if an individual is transient or homeless, they're hard to locate. Since the letter goes to your home, the census enumerators come knock at your door. So you may be hard to locate. You could be hard to contact. Perhaps you don't answer the door when the government knocks. You might be hard to persuade. Distrust of the government might convince you to be hard to persuade to fill out your census. Or maybe you're hard to interview. Perhaps English isn't your first language and the census enumerator comes speaking a language that you don't understand, you don't communicate in. You'd be, that's an example of someone who's hard to interview. And we have a little bit more trivia for those who weren't able to participate in the first round. So again, if you haven't already, you'll text 22333 to the number ZL499 and give us your thoughts on why you think African Americans remain undercounted in 2020. How is it that the reduction in the count at the first census in 1790 has persisted? What are your thoughts? So again, if you haven't already, in order to join the poll, you'll text 22333 and you'll send ZL499 to that number. That'll allow you to join the poll, and then we'll see your answers here. So we'll give everybody a minute to get some answers in. I see distrust. That's that's a good one. Hopefully we don't remain undercounted in 2020. Also a good one. The census does ask for your phone number. Maybe you don't answer when they call. Maybe it changes. You don't know. But these are all really good examples. Yes, fear of the government. That's a great example. We now know that Title 13 protects everyone who submits their census information. It's federally protected. There's jail time, thousands of dollars in fines, but there's still a fear of the government and what they can do with your information. And not knowing the importance. That's a really good one. We still have people asking, what's the census? You can't know how important something is if you don't even know what it is. So these are great. So yeah, back in Reconstruction era, after the Civil War, there continued to be reasons for the undercount. They included, these are some examples, the Black Codes. They were laws designed to limit the freedom and autonomy of African Americans. So laws saying you can only work here, you can only live here, you can only work on a plantation and live on that plantation. That's severely limiting your options as a free person. We've got the KKK. We have a terrorist organization that terrorized the African American community using violence. If someone burns a cross on your lawn, you know, the census enumerator, the government coming when they didn't show, when the police didn't show up, you know, to respond to that, perhaps when the government comes knocking, asking for census data, you might be reluctant to answer the door. And also Jim Crow legalized racial segregation. And then, of course, systemic racism, inequalities in education, housing, employment, all of these things that persist today. But these were some reasons why that undercount persisted then and now. So moving on, here's a quick timeline here of the Reconstruction era, or rather the American Civil War and then that Reconstruction era. So we've got in the 1860s, we've got the American Civil War, which begins and ends. We see the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments ratified, and the end of that slave questionnaire, which we'll get into a little more later. So following the Civil War, we enter this period between, 1865 to 1877 that brought along incredible shifts and changes to the rights of African Americans. We've got the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. And so, that's, I guess, the trigger in 1865. 1868, we've got the 14th Amendment ratified that grants citizenship to all persons born in the U.S., including former slaves. Later on in 1870, we see the end of the slave questionnaire. And that's relevant because historically, because, well, most of us know, or maybe you don't know, perhaps at the end of this you will, how the census form looks. So it's going to ask for your name, some personal information, and some demographic information. And with when you visit a plantation, you get that information from the white members of the household. However, you're simply getting numbers regarding your slaves. So the slave questionnaire ended in 1870, and then, the freed slaves were to have been not filling out the census because self-enumeration hadn't started yet, but they would have been answering the same questions that their white counterparts would have been answering. So it's a significant shift because in terms of record keeping, you've got decades where that information simply wasn't available. And really, still now, we've got hundreds of years of misinformation. So we've got the 14th Amendment, we've got the 15th Amendment. Granted the right to vote to African American men, ratified in February of 1870, and is, the right to vote and the right to be counted are very closely connected. In the same year, the right to vote is given, and in that very year, we see the end of that slave questionnaire. Or rather, we see that it simply doesn't exist anymore. So major shifts happening. And, it's important to note for everyone that a lot can happen in 10 years. And we always stress that in our census outreach. However, here's a great example. Within a decade, we had a war begin and end. We had 3 amendments ratified that drastically shifted the rights of African Americans in the country, completely changed the structure of the country. Some people are just still reeling from its effects. And we see the end of that slave questionnaire. So massive shifts. People who filled out or people who spoke to their enumerators rather in 1860 had a completely different experience in 1870. And we have another opportunity for some participation. So if you haven't joined the poll, you can. You're going to text the number 22333, and you'll send the code ZL499 to join if you haven't already. If you have, you'll answer the question. Which government agency determines which census questions on race are included on the census? So we've got a few government agencies here. The Census Bureau, we've got Department of the Interior, Health and Human Services, Office of Management and Budget. So again, if you'd like to join the poll, you can text ZL499 to the number 22333. And for this one, you'll just send a letter, A, B, C, or D. So I'll wait for a few more answers to roll in since so many of you participated the last time. Excuse me. Okay. Let's see. A few more seconds. I get a few more answers in. Okay, so which agency determines which questions on race are included on the census? And it is OMB. So the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. Primary goal, to assist the president in meeting policy, budget, management, regulatory objectives. However, they also determine what questions on race are included in the decennial census, not the Census Bureau. What OMB does is they make sure that every federal government agency uses the same racial and ethnic categories. So that's interesting. Essentially, the federal government is determining what shows on that form. It's not the Census Bureau. So if you feel like you're not adequately represented on the census form, it's not the Census Bureau's fault. It's OMB. And why is this important? Well, racial terms come in and out of favor from one decade to the next. The federal government tends to lag behind in terms of response, in terms of updating forms and files such that it better reflects the diversity of the nation. So this is kind of an example of how we flowed through that change. We have a point at which the African Americans, slaves, aren't being counted at all, or rather they're 3/5 of the population is being counted, but they're not being categorized in any way. They're simply slaves. And then we see a transition through all of these terms. And part of that is because the OMB, who determines what we see on these forms, they work for the office of the president. And so for the first time in 120 years, Negro doesn't appear on the 2020 census form. So when we all applied for college, any federal form that you apply, that you've filled out, it's had Negro on it, and now it doesn't. Massive change, positive move forward. Important to note, again, OMB works for the office of the president. The shift happened in 2013 when Obama was in office. And all populations of the African diaspora are affected. If you feel like you're not adequately represented on the census form, let OMB know. You can write them a letter at any time. Doesn't have to be a census year or anything like that. And so we've got 230 years it took for the census form to, or, for the census process to both give African Americans the opportunity to have a complete count, as well as the opportunity to self-identify in a way that makes sense. Maybe you don't consider, maybe you're unhappy with the term Black. Let OMB know. You can send them a letter. And we've got one more opportunity for a little audience participation. So if you've already joined, go ahead and answer this question. Why is an undercount problematic for African Americans? Why does it matter when a community isn't adequately counted? So if you haven't joined the poll, if you're new, you'll text ZL499 to the number 22333. I see some responses rolling in. Less resources and less representation are absolutely correct. And almost the point. Again, for those of you who still would like to join, text ZL499 to the number 22333. Right, you won't get that perks or aid of government assistance. The government wants to have data to back up assistance. We have to indicate need, and you can't indicate need without data. And the data that's used for that is the census count. So yes, lack of funding. All of this about the dollars, the money, right? Good job. So yeah, there's a lot on the line. These are our 4 R's that we use here at UAU for the census outreach team. So you have the right to be counted. You have the right to privacy. Your census data isn't shared with any other government agency. It's aggregated. You're protected by Title 13. There's no fear of retribution from NYPD, ICE, whatever government agency might make you feel uncomfortable. They don't have access to your census data. And yes, resources, the money, $675 billion distributed each year for public services and programs. So that's SNAP, that's early childhood education, the National School Lunch Program. You want your kid to have lunch when they go to school, so they have to count. Representation. That's an important one. New York is in danger of losing seats in the House of Representatives if we don't get a complete count. Last census count, we lost representation. Texas gained representation. We're celebrating Juneteenth today because that very state didn't free its slaves until 2 years after emancipation. So they may not hold the same values as representatives from here in New York. We want fair representation in the House. You have to show up and respond to your census. And redistricting. Our representation here at the local level, we want those representatives to actually represent Staten Island. We're varied, we're a rich tapestry, we have a lot of different cultures and languages spoken, and we want a representative that represents us. And the only way we can achieve all of these goals is if we get 100% census completion in Staten Island. So that is the end of my presentation. UAU is on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, at UAU Workforce Development. If you haven't already filled out your census, go ahead to 2020census.gov. It takes 10 minutes. It's only 10 questions. Filling out your census will take less time than watching my presentation today. I think we're ready to join our panelists. Oh, actually, I'm a couple minutes early. Let me join our call again. By the way, if you have already completed your census, be sure to let us know in the chat. Or rather on the, on the chat. This is being streamed on Facebook Live. And I'm actually just gonna go ahead and introduce our panelists quickly, just let you know who's going to be here, and then we'll give them the opportunity to kind of introduce themselves and let us know what they do for our community and why their voices are important and what they're working on or whatever they'd like to share. So we're going to have 3 panelists today. We've got Abu from Akasi. We've got Debbie Ann Paige, our historian today. We've got Tanisha Franks of UFT, the United Federation of Teachers. And we've got John Macbeth of St. Philip's and Occupy the Block joining us. And let's see, I see that Miss Debbie Ann Page is available. She has a bit of a time restriction, so I'm going to start off with you and have you do your introduction for us, please.
Well, it's just brief. My name is Debbie Ann Page. I am a public historian and professional genealogist as my role here on Staten Island, but I also work for an organization called the Council of State Governments, where I staff a council on communities of color and military veterans affairs and territorial relations with Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Awesome, thank you. And we'll do just a quick introduction as well from Tanisha Franks. I see you there.
Hi there, my name is Tanisha Franks. I am a lifelong Staten Islander. I am a educator for the New York City Department of Education and a union representative for the United Federation of Teachers. I am a community organizer, and I have worked with organizations such as the Universal Temple of the Arts. Of recent recently I have co-founded an organization called Occupy the Bronx, Staten Island, and founded an organization called Mothers Against Senseless Killing, Staten Island.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to let Abu Sai quickly introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be here. You know, such initiative need to be supported in the community. Again, my name is Abu Sijahate. I'm an advocate and community leader, and I'm part of the ACASI, which is the African Community Alliance of Staten Island, and also an active member of the Senegalese Association of Staten Island. You know, for years, more than 60 years, I've been helping different various community organizations, to promote some of the key words that we believe in, which is inclusion and diversity in our community. So when it comes to immigrant integration is something that we've been working hard and, to help people really understand the concept and the different model that we wanted to put in place. And one of them is civic engagement and participation. And when it comes to the census, such initiative, I think this is something that we need to highlight. And beside that, also leadership development, which is very important from my social perspective because I'm a social worker, and community participation and development through community unity, build a bridge between all communities, which is a building effort that we've been talking about. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for the introduction. And I think I don't see John. If I'm wrong, if I'm just too new to Zoom, but I don't see him. I don't think he's here yet. So we'll jump into our discussion. And I'm going to start kind of with our historical question here. So census history and African American history have been quite uniquely intertwined. However, we still have African Americans who are 30, 40 years old who don't know what the census is, and furthermore don't know why it's important. Why do you think it's something that plenty of people need to be convinced to participate in? So I'm going to initially direct this question to Debbie, and then, get some additional feedback.
So I think that many people don't know the significance of the census because we aren't taught civics any longer in school. So without civics and understanding the role of representation and the role of the Constitution in determining representation and where the census comes out of that, many of us don't know it because we aren't taught it. And so if you don't have a teacher that is taking the time to give you that little extra, then you wouldn't know. But it's significant for a host of reasons, some of which you've named, right? So beginning in 1790, as we're counting Black bodies, because they're Black bodies at that point, and they're counting for every 5 bodies, they're counting them as 3 and giving representation to enslavers without us having any representation. So they want to be fair and equitable to enslavers, but there's nothing for the people who are being enslaved. And so we fight and we meander, we get to the point where we get to the 13th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment gives us this wiggle room for re-enslavement, right? So it's neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime. And you spoke about this a little bit, where the punishment for crime becomes these Black codes, where if I'm standing on the sidewalk and someone thinks that I'm a vagrant, I get accused of a crime and I go away and I do hard time. But this is really important at this point, because what happens is that Black bodies are being counted in those communities and not the communities where they actually live. So again, bodies are being stolen, removed, given to white communities for representation, and we're without representation. After Reconstruction, after Reconstruction, the same thing. And then we move further into the war on drugs, and we have this rise in the prison industrial complex, where again, most of these prison industrial complexes are in white rural communities. Black bodies are stolen from the communities, these urban communities where they reside, put in those communities. They get representation, they get the counting, and the people who are left at home in these communities are left without.
Hi, John. I think you're unmuted. I don't.
Hi.
Hi there. Just one moment. I'll have you introduce yourself. Debbie, were you interrupted there?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I just wanted to wrap it up with the prison industrial complex, where mostly white communities are still gaining benefit from Black bodies being counted there, as opposed to being counted in the places where they actually live. So although we talk about a full, complete count, we actually still don't have one based on just that premise.
Excellent points. And wrapping back around to something that you mentioned, we're not being taught civics in school, which is true. Tanisha, what do you think in terms of, the question, why do people still need to be convinced to participate? And the assertion that, it starts at the educational level.
Yes, so I think, and thank you, Debbie, for your brilliance always. Your historical context is always appreciated. I think that whenever we talk about anything and Black and Brown communities in the United States, you just can't leave out the history. And so we appreciate Debbie Ann so much because she always brings that into the space. The census is a numbers game, right? And I say game, because unfortunately so much of being an American has to do with this this game that I'm gonna call a game, right? And so that conversation about 3/5 of a human being and representation, and even when we go back to the American Revolution and the importance of representation, like America is no stranger to what it means to be represented, right? And so you can't leave that out of any conversation. And when we talk about school and we talk about teaching history, the benefit of teaching students what all of this means is that they actually understand and they become empowered, right? So when we don't teach students civics, which I have to say, is not accurate. So you both agree that we don't teach students civics in school, and there's a mandate in curriculum, in social studies curriculum, that actually occur. And I will go further to say that there's a mandate in New York State law that demands that occur. The question is, how is that actually implemented and what does it actually look like? So when we talk about communities of color and students of color and them actually like holding on to what really is happening and being given the critical thinking skills, right, which would enable you to then ask questions, right? So our public education system should prepare all citizens to become knowledgeable electorate. Like you should be able to go through the public school system and come out on the other side of it, able to ask these questions and asking ourselves, what role does the miseducation of Black and Brown people play in their lack of advancement? So if you become a society that isn't questioning the status quo, then things stay the same and no one pretty much argue it. But our country is founded on the idea that these, like, there's in America, there's a air quotes new world because people fled the places where they were so that they can come to a place where there would be fairness. And we as Americans, if we go back to John Locke and philosophers like that, we as Americans understand that fairness has to do with representation. The census is all about being counted so you can be represented accurately. And so when we don't give students that knowledge and that history and that foundation, they're like, they go with the and excuse me because I can't think of anything else to call it, but we'll say the conspiracy theory that you can't trust the government. So you can't trust the government, so you don't tell them that there's 9 of you in a household. And so because you're hiding things because you don't trust them. And then in turn, the lack of counting comes back to bite you later because you're not, that household of 9 is not accurately represented. So it's like multiple things playing in that keeps us from getting where we need to be.
Excellent. I agree. So yeah, you brought up a lot of good points, and I just want to quickly, Debbie is on a bit of a time constraint, so I just want to give her the opportunity to add anything that she'd like and to introduce us to her app project that she's working on.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So thank you, Tanisha, because you really laid it out exactly what I would have done in terms of schooling and why it's so important. I know there's a push in state government to across the country to now reconfigure what civics looks like. And again, so that our children can understand the depth of what is necessary to be productive citizens. Like when my kids were growing up, I didn't say, oh, you had to be a doctor, lawyer, whatever. I said, I just want you to grow up to be a productive citizen, and here are the parameters of it. But if you have a group, if we have a whole generation of people who don't know what being a productive citizen is based on over policing of Black and brown bodies, and so that you're removed from school systems, you're suspended at higher rates, so you're missing school and seat time. So even if they were teaching civics, you would miss a lot of it, and that becomes a whole different issue and problem. But so to kind of pivot now to my app is that I've been asked for years, Debbie, are you going to write a book? I love books, right? But no, I don't have the time. But I did think, what if I put an app together, right? That I can pinpoint the different things about Staten Island's African-American past that people just don't know about. As an example, we're talking about a census. The census came before, they were counting Black bodies before 1790 in terms of colonial censuses. 1755 here on Staten Island, Thomas Dungan, who Dungan Hills is named after, was a major slaveholder, and he lists the names of the people who he enslaved. People need to know that. And so we have different, so I call it a heritage tour because it's about who we are, right? Good and bad. It's about Debbie Rose being the first council member. It's about the Black WACs, the Women's Army Corps being stationed here on Staten Island in the 1940s. It's about the adverse things that have happened to us as people. It's about enslavement. It's about freedom. It's about agency, where a segregated school in Staten Island in the 1880s, the parents took agency and said, no, you won't put a white teacher in this school. We want a teacher that looks like us, that cares about our students. I mean, from the 1880s in Stapleton. So a lot of those things you'll find in the app. You'll find famous people who've been here, like Chris Kidd Reed went to 49. Not a lot of people know that. And so I'm hoping to be able to put all those things together and give people just a glimpse into African-American history on Staten Island. And the app, when you walk about Staten Island, will give you alerts if it's on your phone. And so if you're walking by Bay Street, a thing will pop up where you'll see that James Marbine was nearly lynched in 1906, right where Eric Garner was murdered. And I'm hoping that it will spark conversations and that we can take it a little bit further later, but at least as a baseline in the beginning.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. I know you might have to go. That was very important information. And, you know, usage of that app in 10 years. I mean, imagine the increase in census participation. So thank you very much for joining us.
Everyone, bye.
And I just want to quickly go back to John so that he has an opportunity to introduce himself and let us know who he is, what he does for our community in Staten Island, and whatever else he wants to squeeze into 2 minutes. You're still on mute.
Yeah, I just did.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm John Macbeth, community activist, community organizer. A lot of the work that I've done has been in the area of anti-violence work within our communities, advocacy work for individuals as well as groups, providing people with access to services or things that they might need from government agencies and things like that. I'm on the community board. I'm the chairperson for the local area committee. I'm on the board of directors of Project Hospitality. I'm a co-founder of Occupy the Block, which is an anti-violence group. And whatever I'm called on to do for my community, I'm more than willing to jump in and help as much as I possibly can. But with regard to some of the things that I've already heard you folks talking about with the census and the importance of it and how much impact it can really have on our community. When we see things like a difference in services between the North Shore and the South Shore, or when we see a difference in services between our community and other communities around the city, that just highlights some of the things that some of the importance of the census and how important it is to get everybody counted, because it's a direct reflection on how much services are going to be provided to our community.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that you're leading us right into my next question. So either you or Abu, hopefully, might have some feedback, but I'm wondering, what are some tangible ways in which an increase in census completion would impact African American communities? So in other words, why are you particularly filling out your census? What do you want to see in your community? What do you want to gain from it?
It's about the entire community. So whereas there's an obvious differences in the level of quality of service that's provided to our communities. We see a lot of things like overgrown lots, and whereas in the past, these lots were usually taken care of either by sanitation or by somebody else. Now all of a sudden there's no money for that, or there's not enough not enough activity to generate people to fix that. But for me personally, I understand the value, and I look at a lot of things from a value perspective. So when I went to fill out the census for myself and my family, I understood that every person needed to be counted. I understood that they really couldn't do much with the information. If they really wanted the information they'd already had, they could, if the government, I hear all of the conspiracies and things like that. And it's hard to undo somebody who has a thought process of government conspiracy, especially since the government has a bad track record to begin with. But I just see the value of it, and the value of it to our community, and how important it is that everyone does everything they possibly can to get everyone counted. It's not going to hurt anyone, in the best case scenario, it only helps.
Excellent. I absolutely agree. And I think, Abu, you have kind of a unique perspective here. What, in terms of the African community here on Staten Island, you as a person who is advocating for census completion, what are you looking to gain? What are you hoping that people who hear our message, get out of census completion? How is it going to help their communities?
Thank you, Zaki. So first of all, I'm a person that believe in that it's very important for us to really enforce some key values, some key aspects, in different community. And one of them, especially you mentioned it earlier, and I think my brother John said it all. He highlights some key area that we need to focus in. And first of all, from my personal perspective, I'm seeing this as a moral obligation, first of all, because I'm a type of person that really promote, in different community, especially in the African community, to help them really understand and know their right and responsibility. When you live in a country where, my sister Tanisha said it all. She mentioned, representation, she mentioned fair share, and we've been dealing with so many issues in the community where, in order for us to have those issues resolved, we have to include all stakeholders, including those communities that we are serving. And most of them, there is a level of vulnerability. Therefore, for me, it's very important that we educate them, which is the first step. By educating them, what's it's required? It's required to meet them where they are and walk them through the process. It doesn't gonna happen overnight. I know the census is here, we have a deadline. Yes, we gotta wrap it up. But listen, we're dealing with human beings, right? And some of them, they have their why. The same way I have my why. Sister Tanisha, John Macbeth, you have your why. Their why matter to me. What they should, what they get by filling out the census. Last night I was running around, Clove Lake, and I saw some sign there that says it only takes 10 minutes to answer 10 questions that will impact your life for the next 10 years. Right? And Tanisha said it all. Actually, I do agree with you, and your model is very good model because we got to be very strategic and practical in our approach. And ACASI, African Community Alliance of Staten Island, we have a census committee that we put in place. And by the way, I would like to say kudos to the census committee and to the IGB board of ACASI because they've been working hard, tirelessly to put together a strategy that will help ACASI to be part of this process. And one of them, we identify 3 key areas. One of them is to educate them. The second one is really to motivate them. And the third one is to activate. So the activation process, actually, this is where actually I've been saying that when it comes to civic engagement, yes, we still have a lot to do. We have several initiatives in Staten Island. We have some leadership development program, and UAU is one of them working hard to address those needs. We need to focus more on community participation. When I say community participation, / community development, because I'm a social worker, both of them go together, they tie in together. But community unity, when it comes to African American, and really through the presentation of our sister that just left earlier said it all. Background information is important, and background information is history. And without that, you will not be able to see where the gaps is, why this gap. Try to do some research that will give us some findings. Those findings, we can take it into account and to move forward for the next years. We don't have to wait until the census gets here, to focus on result. Yeah, you have some effect that we can feel during the process in the short term that tells us in the next 5 years or the next census that will happen in 10 years, we're going to get this result. Yes, social research need to be conducted in those undercount community that we call, in your terminology, my terminology, the hard count community. And those among them is the African communities. We're dealing with so many social barriers, cultural barriers, language barriers, and so many of them. Therefore, we need to focus on strategy and see how we can be more practical and more strategic in our approach. Thank you.
Agreed, and thank you. You made a lot of good points. The African community is, you know, specific here on Staten Island because we have to address that language barrier. And I was absolutely thinking that a lot of the work that we're doing now is really, you know, in some ways in preparation for that 2030 census count, because we're just planting a lot of roots here. But we've just got a few more minutes left, and a lot of you have touched on this, but I just want to give the opportunity for us to touch on it kind of once again. And that is, we've got the coronavirus pandemic having hit the African American community particularly hard. In the midst of that, we've got issues of systemic racism, injustice, police brutality, having become and at the forefront of, you know, the news, I guess. And how is it that, since, you know, we're here talking about census completion, so how is it that census completion has remained to be, or continues to be, an important way to participate in civic engagement? Tanisha or John, anything to add?
So could you just rephrase the question again? I think I got it, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, essentially, you know, with everything going on, with all of the current events, you know, we could be literally talking about any number of things today, but we're focused on census completion. Why is it still important in terms of civic engagement, in lieu of the current events, for, you know, for us to be still talking about and participating in?
Right. So I had actually been asked to do some testifying for the disparity in the response to COVID in communities of color, specifically Black. And what I like, in talking to individual people, I couldn't really put my finger on specific and like you had said earlier, tangible things that actually make it so that you know, there's this disparity. And what I came to understand is, again, and Debbie had to leave us, but the historical context in which we show up in a crisis. So, you know, one of the things that I always say, and I'm sure it's not original, so I don't want to act like this is mine, but when a crisis hits the greater population, for the Black community, this crisis is going to be like 10 times worse, because we're already in crisis prior to the pandemic, prior to recession. We're already in crisis. And so what needs to happen for communities of color, specifically Black community, is that there has to be an amplification of goods and services. And that has to be like on the book. And because we never got our 40 acres and a mule, and because in addition to not getting that, we actually had additional obstacles put into place. Debbie and Paige mentioned the 13th Amendment. Those things, those tools of white supremacy that actually creates dysfunction in our community, makes it so that things are rough for us. So we actually have to have a conversation. So if I'm not mistaken, I believe Governor Cuomo then said there will be additional funding for communities of color. So being counted in that way. So if we're talking about dollars, and if we're going to say, okay, there communities of color, because of their historical turbulence and the problems that existed because of white supremacy and other oppressive social constructs, because of those things, we have to make sure that we give more to those spaces. They're going to decide how they give based on how many people are in that space. And they're only going to be able to know that if people actually have engaged in the process to be counted.
Excellent. You couldn't have said it better. Perhaps John or Abu, do you want to add anything before we close out our discussion tonight?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in relation to the disparities, the health disparities especially are one of the main drivers behind African Americans contracting coronavirus more readily, dying from it more faster than other groups. When we talk about those types of disparities, and then we're not counted, um, that you're invisible. You're invisible to the powers that be, so to speak. And there's when they think of how much a hospital is covering, there's no a public hospital on Staten Island. They think about how much a hospital is covering. They're only considering those people who were counted. They always look back to the census. The census feeds so many other entities, and whenever anybody asks a question, well, how many people are we servicing? And they'll look at Stapleton, and because only 47% of Stapleton is filled in, then that's how many people that are there, and the other 53% suffer for it. So it is just so vitally important to make sure, especially if we're going to depend on those services, and the health disparity is not going to change overnight. I mean, some of it is culturally based, in reference to diabetes and things like that, and those underlying conditions. But a lot of it is access to health services, education about health services and about health in general. Those are the types of things that our community suffers with.
Absolutely. Thank you for the feedback. Those are perfect ways in which the census remains incredibly relevant. And just quickly before we end, Abu, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, sure. Just to say, that it's very important that we focus on needs because it's actually one of the key areas. Us as an advocate, we need to constantly work with all stakeholders, including our elected officials. And John said it, disparity make me think of inequality. Disparity make me think of funding. At the end of the day, the key word we need to focus is resource money because $1 will not run Staten Island, $1 will not run America. Therefore, we need to leverage resource, have more program, and give opportunities to various community to strengthen, the asset that they have, the disposable asset in terms of, resource, and improve it, because I usually say that the largest room in the world is a room of improvement. We need to build capacity, from island communities, regardless, of, their origin, regardless of their, cultural background, regardless, because my word always has been, inclusion and diversity. And also see how we can have a good community partnership to ensure access to key resource, as John said, program from various organizations, but also from government services, because education, economic opportunity, socio-economic empowerment, civic leadership, and community bridge, from different groups also will bring unity among us and will be able, to bring some sort of good result, sometime soon. And, we all remain optimistic in that. But let's just focus on the census, meet people where they are, help them understand the importance of this census, what the census can bring on the table in the next few years, so we don't have to lose seat in the Congress, in the Senate, because yes, someone said it earlier, New York State is at risk. And even New York City, therefore we need to focus on really have people be counted.
You got it. Well, thank you for that input. Our entire panel has given us a lot to think about and really highlighted the importance of representation, the importance of that federal funding, the $675 billion on the table each year, and especially highlighting our right and responsibility to participate civically and fill out the census. So just thank you to all our panelists for joining us. If anyone wasn't convinced before having participated in this discussion, or rather listened to us participate in this discussion, I'm sure they've gone and filled out their census now. So if you have, let us know in the comments. And once again, this has been the UAU Census Outreach Team. My name is Zsakee. Thank you very much for joining us. And that will conclude our panel discussion today. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Oh, and have a good weekend. Have a good night. Happy Juneteenth.
Thank you.